Rakachu b'toratecha Adonai lo ma'amed v'nei la'aya
Hadisha Velin, Morris Kaddish, page 226. Yitgadal, V'Yitkadash, Shemei Rava, Yalma, Dibra, Kirute, V'Yamlich, Malchute, V'Chayechon, V'Yomechon, Aye, Devol Beit Yisrael, V'Gala, V'Zman, Kari, V'Imru, Amen.
Amen.
Yeh,
Hey,
Shmei Rava,
Raham
Barak,
Avrak,
Ve'Alam,
Levam
Omei,
Omaya.
Yibarach, Yishtabach, Yipar, Yitramam, Yitnase, Yitadar, Yitalev, Yitalal, Shmei Kudisha, Brichu, Leila, Mikol, Birchata, Bashirata, Tush Bechata, Venechamata, Damiran, Velma, Vigmru, Amen.
Amen.
Yesh Lama Rabba Min Shemaya V'chaim Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael V'imru Amen.
Amen.
Aseh Shalom Mama Uya Aseh Shalom Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael V'imru Amen.
Amen.
Yashakoah to Steve for leading us in our Mariam service. And welcome to Mar Cheshvan. It's a great pleasure to welcome to our congregation Andreas Laqueur, who is, well, he's going to tell you his story. So I don't want to say very much to introduce him. But I do want to say two things. The first is I would like to thank Mishka, and Mishka is Andreas's cousin. And Mishka has been talking to me about her cousin in Germany for several years now because she's just thinks that his story is so engaging and wonderful. So first, thanks goes to Mishka, and we're thrilled that Mishka is able to join us by Zoom in spite of being at Daughters of Sarah and having her health concerns. And what a great benefit that we have the ability to do that. And I'd like to thank the Adult Education Committee and our chair, Amy Posner, for making this possible and arranging for it. And for all of the hard work that our Adult Education Committee does to make sure that we have some really wonderful, wonderful programs. So I'm very excited to introduce Andreas. He is going to share about his life and what he learned about his ancestry and how he came to his connection to our people. And I think I've given enough tantalizing hints that you'll be able to enjoy. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Andreas to share his story with us. And thank you.
While Andreas is going out there, I just will say, and apologies to those of you on Zoom, following Andreas's talk, there are refreshments in the library.
But we'll toast you on Zoom.
So thank you, Rabbi Spitzer, for your warm words of welcome. Thank you to all of you having me here. And thank you to Mishka, who made me curious about your congregation. She plays a very significant role in my biography, and I will explain that in the course of my talk. My name is Laqueur, Laqueur. You might have come across a historian, Walter Laqueur.
That was my first wondering.
Who has been teaching in Jerusalem, in Washington, and in London, and he is a family member. And I will not answer the next question, which you will possibly ask, is how exactly are you related to Mishka? We try to figure out. We don't know right now, but we promise to figure it out by Shabbat. I'll give you. But I think much more important than that is we are cousins. We are Mishpocha. We are one tribe. And this is what counts for me and which counts for her. And I think it should count for everybody. Genealogical research in Jewish families in the 19th and 20th century is quite a difficult task. I don't tell you anything which you didn't know, especially Jewish families in Germany and in the heart of Europe, especially, of course, under the conditions of the Shoah. Too many congregational records have been lost, have been destroyed. Too many cemeteries have been vandalized. Too many villages, too many places, too many archives, whatever, were just burnt, destroyed in what manner. So it's difficult to find records. That's the first difficulty. But our big advantage is that we're called Laqueur. And we are not, our name is not Cohn or Levi, which would obviously offer me a special place in the service, but it's difficult to place. I can't just go up to another Levi and say, hey, are we related? Doesn't really make sense. And forget about Miller or any other. So our big advantage is that we have the name Laqueur, which had an oscillating spelling, Laqueur. We have a family branch. They spell themselves Laquer without the second U. Sometimes there was also an I somewhere in the middle, but it's lost again. But the bottom line is we don't know of any Laqueurs or Laqueurs worldwide who are not in one way or the other related to us. That's what I wanted to explain and to say when I'm referring to the tribe. And so if in the following I would talk about my cousins, I don't really care if they're first cousins or second cousins or third cousins. We met in the Laqueur tribe. We had several family reunions organized in Israel, in the United States, in Holland, by a generation who sadly now passes away, of people in the various branches of our family who were intrigued by the name and did some ancestry research. I'm sure you find a lot on Ancestry. I don't know, there are various websites where you'll come across our family name, Laqueur. And so when we do research, I'd like to share just a few anecdotes with you. My nephew, son of my eldest brother, Klaus Laqueur, lives in Berlin. So do I. One day, he found a note in his letterbox in his apartment house. And the note said, "Hi, I'm Anna Laqueur. Are we related?" And you might have guessed, yes, we are. Anna Laqueur is from Sydney, Australia. And we knew of a family branch that had emigrated to Australia, Karen Laqueur. On that opportunity, we met both Anna and Karen. But imagine, would you call it a coincidence? It's just one nondescript apartment building, of which we have thousands in Berlin, where Marcel, my nephew, used to live. And Anna was invited by friends to a party of whatever, student life party. And she happened to have a glance at the letterboxes and the names of the letterboxes. And she said, wait a minute, Laqueur, interesting. And so she dropped the note. I'm personally convinced there is no such thing as coincidence. In one way or the other, it was meant to be like that. And so this completed another, a facet of our perception of the tribe we're following now since about 30 years. And another anecdote, a good friend of mine in Berlin sent me an email and sent me a photo. And he said he was in Tröwitz. Tröwitz is a little village somewhere southeast of Berlin. I don't know if the name means anything to you. Possibly not. Why should it? Unless you're familiar with that particular part of the story. And there was a poem, a text, signed Renata Laqueur. And he asked me, are you related to Renata Laqueur? And you've guessed it already. Yes, we are. Renata Laqueur was a Dutch Jew living in Amsterdam. She was deported first to Westerbork and later to Bergen-Belsen. She belonged to the group of the so-called privileged prisoners in the concentration camp. Privileged meant they were not killed immediately. They were not tortured to death immediately. They were tortured to death a little slower because the Nazis still had the expectation they might bargain them in at one point. So the end of World War II came across. The Allied had landed in France. The British were advancing towards Westerbork. And the Nazis decided to relocate the last 7,500 prisoners of those privileged prisoners in 3 trains to, what's the name? Treblinka. No, not Treblinka. The concentration camp in Czechia, northwest of Prague. Sorry, I forgot the name. It'll come to me. One train was immediately got behind the American lines and was liberated there. One reached its destination, and Renata Laqueur was on the 3rd train. That was the so-called lost train, because they were really trying to find a way all the way through almost completely destroyed Germany. So wherever they reached any major river, apparently the bridge had been blown up or was impassable. And so after, I think, a journey of almost 3 weeks, the Nazi guards abandoned the train and the Red Army liberated the train, liberated, if you can call it a liberation. There were initially about 2,500 people just in cattle wagons. 200 of them had passed away during this transport of days where they weren't fed or didn't have any support of any sort. But Renata Laqueur was among the surviving, and this was her place close to that little village of Tröwitz. And in Tröwitz, there is a Jewish cemetery where some of those who didn't survive or who passed away shortly after liberation just because of exhaustion, of sickness or whatever, are buried. And Renata Laqueur has written a Bergen-Belsen diary. She did it under amazing, almost inconceivable circumstances. She stole the occasional sheet of paper here and there hid it somewhere in her underwear or in shoes or whatever. She managed to smuggle out her notices, and soon after liberation, she sat down and tried to write down as accurately as possible what she experienced this time in Bergen-Belsen. She later became a historian. She did some research. She even wrote her PhD on concentration camp diaries. So again, my friend, whom I just had met just a few years ago when I moved to Berlin, knew that my family name was Laqueur. He came to this place just on an outing with his girlfriend, found that sign, photographed it, and said, "Are you related?" So these things obviously contribute to our research. So where does this tribe come from or originate? To our chagrin, we are not able to go back beyond about, say, 1820. It was the time in Silesia, now Poland, then Prussia. It was the time of tolerance. Jews were allowed to settle where they wanted. The Jews were allowed to follow whatever job or occupation they wanted. They weren't limited in the choice. And there was a tiny little town. I don't know how familiar you are with the geography. There is a major city in German time. It was called Breslau. Now it's called Wrocław in Polish. Go east, 30 miles east from that is Namysłów. And another 20 miles southeast is a little place which was called Stettel in German. This is, mind you, it's not the Hasidic Stettel, not the proverbial Stettel of, let's say, Anatevka. And it says, was Stettel just the diminutive of Stadt, little town? Today in Polish, it's called miejsce, which is the same diminutive because miasto in Polish is town and miejsce is little town. And this little village, miejsce, had a growing Jewish population. I don't know of what size, but if I'm not mistaken, something like 60 to 70% Jewish population. And they decided to have a rabbi and to hire a rabbi for themselves. And they found a certain David ben Eliezer. And it was the time of the Napoleonic law, which made it mandatory for Jewish families to adopt civil family names. So this David ben Eliezer called himself David Lazarus, which makes quite sense because Lazarus is just the Latinized form of Eliezer. So in the Latin Bible, you'll find instead of Eliezer, you'll find Lazarus, and he chose the name Laqueur. Why? Search me. No, really, there are a lot of theories, but nobody knows. My assumption is it was just kind of chic, a bit mundane, we would say cool, to have a French name. I think that's what our sons, our grandchildren would say today. Possibly it could be related to an origin of a geographical place because there is at least one or two little villages in Poland called Laki, L-A-K-I. But if you're familiar with Polish, this L had this horizontal line, which makes it Waki instead of Lucky. And this is an assumption of my brother, was that maybe they originated from there and they were the Laquiers, those from Lucky, possible. But who knows? And at the end, is it that important? To me, not. It's a question of curiosity, but I can live without having solved this mystery. And this David ben Eliezer, David Lazarus Laqueur, had a brother and his name was Joseph ben Joseph ben Eliezer, Joseph Lazarus, and he chose to spell Laqueur only with one U. So we have the Laqueurs and the Laqueurs. And when we had our first family reunion in the early 1990s in Israel, just very shortly, we weren't even aware of the Laqueurs, as the Laqueurs weren't even aware of the Laqueurs. And we just found one another shortly before this reunion. And so it was very happy, very enticing reunion, bringing together more than 120 Laqueurs and descendants of these families coming from Chile, Argentina, South Africa, Australia, United States, obviously a lot of them, United Kingdom, Netherlands, Germany, and a lot from Israel. And that's where our first family reunion took place. And it turned out that, as I said, mentioned in the beginning, there were many Laqueurs and Laqueurs who were curious about their family name and did some family research and put together family trees, and we tried to bring them all together. It's a never-ending task, but it was very interesting. And so it turned out that there was a Laqueur living in Jerusalem and a Laqueur living just 2 streets away, and they had no idea of the existence of the other. They only met at this family reunion. Amazing story. So you might have noticed when I'm talking about my family, what's my personal point or focus of identification? Yes, I have a German passport, but this is not that important to me. I'll come to that later. My grandfather was sacked because of his Jewish origin. My father couldn't study because of his Jewish origin. Yeah. Thankfully, thank goodness, they survived exile. My point of identification is mishpucha, mishpacha, family.
Can I get you
my
right
cousins, my close, and my close are.
That works. I gotta put him at 8:45. Okay.
Any technical problem or?
Mishka's not muted.
Oh, Mishka, can you mute yourself, please? Okay, yeah. Okay, this is Zoom times. Yeah, you're experiencing that since COVID. I'm experiencing that before COVID. I thought Zoom was a function on my video camera. So I went through a steep learning process, I think, as everybody of you did. So those 2 Laqueurs, Joseph David Lazarus Laqueur, or as we say, the rabbi, forgive me, Rabbi Spitzer, but this is the rabbi for the family, and his brother are at the origin of our tribe. We know that the rabbi's grandfather was a distiller somewhere in Yellow Russia, but that's all what we know. So we tried, but we can't go further back than, say, 1820. But at least in 1820, he was elected rabbi in Stettin, and he had his family, he had sons and daughters. And now the question would be, now we're in 1820, what happened to a Jewish family or originally Jewish family in the first half of the 20th century in Germany and in all those neighboring countries which were conquered by Germans or occupied or whatever? I think what happened, I suppose, to maybe any of your families as well. are there any people of European origin or background? I would have guessed so. So I'm not telling you anything new. You know that. Yeah, what happened to them? Sadly, we know that at least 14 members of our tribe were murdered by the Nazis in various concentration camps. Others barely survived. And how did they continue? How could they continue to live their lives? They were, in geographical terms, scattered all over the world. As I mentioned when I mentioned this first family reunion. In religious terms, they chose different ways. Some maintained their Jewishness, returned to Jewish practice. Some of them are Orthodox in Jerusalem, Shomrei Shabbat, and continued as they had been living before. So not all of them necessarily Orthodox, but just the other day I met my cousin in New York. We never met in person before. It was very exciting. It was just the day before yesterday. And she told me of her uncle who used to have famous, renowned Shabbat dinners at his home. He was not really a practicing Jew, but Shabbat dinner could not be left out. And it could not be left out that he blessed the children present. And what really moved me is that when Nikki told me about that, the descendants of the third generation after that still follow that practice and value Shabbat dinner and value the blessing of the children. I think, wow, it's amazing, isn't it? The family itself chose to, they immigrated to the United States eventually after a long journey through Russia, through Yugoslavia, through Italy and Spain, eventually to the United States. They chose to not give up on Judaism, but to kind of make it less obvious. I wouldn't say hide, but make it less obvious. So the family Silverstein renamed themselves Silton. And they called their son Peter and their daughter Nicole, which wouldn't give away anything. You couldn't tell that they were Jewish. They kind of amalgamated into American society, and also with the intention not to be obviously Jewish. A part of the family chose to become Unitarian, or as Nikki, who I talked to the other day, said she considers herself to be a Junitarian, with quite some sympathy for her Jewish origins, and her brother, whom I've also not yet met in person, but met a few times on Zoom. He's very open to open himself up to his Jewish roots. And I don't know how familiar you are. I wasn't that familiar with with a Unitarian group, but I think we share a lot of ethical values. And so I heard it's not that uncommon that Jews and Unitarians cooperate and socialize with. You're laughing, Rabbi.
We have several people in this room who have a lot of experience with that particular thing.
I'm sorry.
No.
In Germany, I would say I'm bringing owls to Athens. So you know more about that than I do. But I hope I didn't say anything which was wrong. Yeah. Uh, yeah, some of them emigrated to Palestine, later Israel, and they kind of integrated, amalgamated to the Israeli society. So one of my ancestors, Laqueur, renamed himself Bar-Lev, son of the heart, which is, yeah, okay, we'll let it pass by that. Laqueur does not mean heart because cœur in French is spelled C-O-E-U-R, and it is le coeur, not la coeur. It's masculine, not feminine. So it's just the sound, la coeur, which reminds a bit of the heart, and which made them choose the name Bar-Lev and became just ordinary Israeli citizens. And some of them chose to convert even before the Shoah. So before I come to my own personal story, I asked myself, did all these people of this originally Jewish family from Silesia decide to become cosmopolitans? Did they decide by their free will to become citizens of the world? I doubt it. I can't ask the majority, I can't ask anymore. I know from my father that he considered himself a Berliner. He was born in Berlin. He wanted to study in Berlin and remain in Berlin. He had big plans. He wanted to study law and he wanted to reform the public transport system in Berlin, a task which is still not fulfilled. And sadly, he was not able to join in that task. So the family was scattered by political circumstances, by the brute force of the Nazis and other factors. So that's where we stand now. And now, since I mentioned that some of our family members decided to convert, I'm coming to my great grandfather, Louis Laqueur or Ludwig Laqueur. You can see with the double name, French and German, that he was oscillating between two societies. He had been teaching in Paris and Lyon, French, in Strasbourg, which was German. Then after 1871, after the Germans won the war against the French. We know from Louis Laqueur that he grew up traditionally Orthodox. He came from the same area, not Stettel, but Festenberg, which is very close to Stettel. And when he studied in Berlin, if I'm not mistaken, he made quite an effort to find a cheap Jewish kosher kitchen where he could afford the meals for a student. But he came into contact pretty early, and that's what he writes. He left us some memoirs, luckily. But he writes when he was about to join the high school or to prepare for secondary education, there was no school available at his place. And they were friends with a neighboring Protestant minister. And the Protestant minister, who had a son of Louis' age, said, I'm preparing my son for secondary education. Why don't you send your Louis and I can prepare both of them? So he used to walk from his Festenberg to the place, to the, how do you say, rectory? The place where Protestant minister lives. They agreed, the wife agreed to serve non-meaty meals during the week. So just have dairy and fish. And for Shabbat, his mother would give him a Shabbat dinner to take there. So this was, in a way, a very fruitful cooperation, coexistence. And he remembers fondly the time when he stayed with that Protestant pastor's family. I just read a few sentences about how he felt about encountering the other, so encountering the Christian. And he said anti-Semitism was not the topic as it was now. We encountered one another in respect. Well, we pitied the other because we knew we were right, and those poor others, they weren't right. It was their problem, but this was a mutual feeling. But I think in retrospect, I think some of what he experienced at this pastor's family has rubbed off. So going a bit further in his history, he studied medicine. He became a professor of medicine. He married Marie Bamberger, obviously also a Jew. My grandfather was born. So my grandfather was born also halachically Jewish. And then at a certain point, at the late 1890s something, he decided to convert to Protestantism. We don't know why. Unfortunately, his memories only go up to his wedding. So we don't know what happened after. It's just family lore, but family lore has it that he, in a way, estranged from his Jewish roots. And of course, in Prussia, in the German Reich at that time, the attribute of Mosaic belief was not exactly a career booster in the scientific life. So he gave up this attribute of Mosaic belief and became a Protestant. He had my grandfather baptized, which of course did not help him with the Nazis. They persecuted him as a Jew all the way. But my grandfather, whom I've never met in person, sadly, I think he considered himself an upright Protestant. And so did my father. Although both their lives were very, very heavily, life-changingly affected by the Nazis. They were able to survive, thank goodness. But my grandfather, he wasn't convinced that Adolf Hitler would be of any danger. Family lore has it that he said he'll either be voted out of office within the next half year, a thing which happened very often in the Weimar Republic in the years before, or he will just, cool down, just break the edges of his program, and it'll be all right. And this has been a fatal error for many Germans of Jewish origin who didn't take Adolf Hitler seriously. He was so lucky that he received a call to the University of Ankara to teach there. It was the time of the young Turkish Republic. You might remember the name Mustafa Kemal Pasha Atatürk, father of the Turks, who decided to establish a modern, new, westernized Turkish state following the sick man at the Bosporus, the old Ottoman Empire. And he decided to develop 3 universities in Ankara, then the new capital in Istanbul, and in Izmir. And for that purpose, he had a lot of European educators, teachers, professors called to these universities. And by the time my grandfather was called to Ankara, there were already quite some European professors of Jewish origin who were more far-sighted than my grandfather was. And they decided to specifically call colleagues of Jewish origin out of Germany into safety, basically. So that's how my grandfather survived. My father started studying law for the winter term 1933-1934. When he wanted to continue his studies in 1934, the Nazis told him he would never be allowed to make an exam. So he gave up his studies. He started an apprenticeship in a bookshop, but later the bookshop was forced to sack him. And so in 1936, he decided to follow his parents and his younger sister, who had accompanied their parents into exile to Turkey. That's where he met a lovely young emigre's daughter, also daughter of a university teacher. You might have guessed it, my mother. They married in Turkey. My brothers were born in Turkey. The World War was over, and he had to somehow sustain his family. And I didn't know how. And then a friend told him, said, apply to the Foreign Service. And he said, on what qualifications? After 1.5 terms of law and an apprenticeship in a bookshop, which I couldn't finish. And his friend he said, you have a quality they are direly in need of. The Allied forces had promised Germany for each new public servant they would hire with a doubt-free history of not being involved in anything with Nazi Germany. One of the old Nazis would regain his pension rights. Not the heavy perpetrators, but the lot of we call Mitläufer who just walked along and they'd been Nazis as everybody was Nazi. So in a very weird way, my father, who didn't have any qualification but was hired for the Foreign Service, helped an old Nazi to regain his pension rights. No. But okay, I can just observe it, can't be helped. By the way, he didn't know that. I think it was my eldest brother who told him years later that that was the case. Okay, enough of that. So I was born into a Christian family. My father was very good friends with the German pastor who came to Beirut, his first posting in the Foreign Service. And this was a family friendship which lasted until both the pastor and his wife and my parents died. So I was born, baptized, Christian. I was very impressed by the example of that befriended minister. I decided to study Protestant theology, and I made my degree, and I worked during my professional time as an ordained Protestant minister. But it's only part of the story, as you might have gathered. Pretty soon, I became really curious and interested in my personal Jewish roots. It was not a topic at home because my father did not know so much about Judaism at all. I once took him to a study tour to Israel, and then I gave a very little introductory talk, just giving a few basic facts about Judaism. And he came to me and said, I'm impressed what you know about Judaism. He didn't know. But I became more and more interested. I became involved in Christian-Jewish dialogue, which was a very good opportunity for me to meet with Jewish people. And then at a certain stage, my wife and I became involved in a Christian project in Israel called Nes Amim, Sign of the Nations or Sign to the Nations, which was founded by Christian theologians who said we need to bring about a change in Christian attitude towards Judaism, to accept Jews as their elder brothers and sisters in the belief in one God, instead of all this all this strange and wrong beliefs, like Christians superseded the Jews. You had it, but you missed out, and now we have it. You know all the story. And so they decided to allow young people, not only young people, people to stay for a time in Israel, work in Israel in solidarity with the Jewish state of Israel, learn in encounter with Jews and from Jews. And that's where we lived in 30 years ago, from 1994 to 1998. And there I started visiting the Reform Synagogue in Narea more frequently. But still, if I compare it to now, you would find me stumbling through a few words of Hebrew in the Siddur. Of course, I had studied Ivrit Tanakh, the biblical Hebrew, which was a mandatory subject also for Protestant theologians, because we were supposed to read the parts of the Bible in their original language. Well, to be honest, we didn't really bother about Aramaic, so we used translations for the book of Daniel. But basically, we learned how to decipher the text of the Hebrew Bible. But there was nothing like any fluency I would have had by that time. But this process continued, and in the 90s, we started having our family reunions. And this is, I think, Mishka, are you following? Maybe. I suppose she's following us, where I met Mishka, a hitherto unknown cousin of mine, and we took a liking in one another. We found out that we have a lot in common, and we had a lot of ideas to exchange. And later, I invited my cousins to visit the grave of the rabbi, Rabbi David Ben Eliezer, Rabbi David Lazarus Laqueur in Poland. And when we came back to Breslau, to Wrocław, we attended a service in the White Stork Synagogue. And Mishka wanted to say Kaddish for her grandfather, grandmother, I'm not quite sure. And the rabbi, because we were only few people attending the service, so minyan was questionable. And the rabbi asked, do all the people whom you brought to shul, do they count to the minyan? And she looked at me and said, yes, which was obviously, concerning the facts, it was not true. At that time, I was still an officiating Protestant minister. But I asked her, and her answer was, I felt your Yiddishkeit. And I felt, in a way, very deeply understood by her. So my way, and since then we are connected, and she was really instrumental in my way, in my development, I would phrase my return to Judaism. She suggested when I moved, when my wife and I retired 8 years ago, she said, find yourself a Jewish renewal congregation and you'll be all right there. She was right. And I was very happy because in Berlin, this is the only Jewish renewal congregation in Germany. I came there and we had Kiddush. And of course, at the Kiddush, we said, who are you, where are you from? And somebody, of course, asked me, are you Jewish? And then I said, truthfully, well, halachically, not. And our cantor, our spiritual leader, made a quite audible remark saying, according to which halacha? This was an eye-opener for me. I didn't even know that there could be different halachot. I thought halacha is, it's like the law of the Medes and the Persian, just hewn in stone. Okay, to cut a long story short, they accepted me as a Jew of patrilineage. through my grandfather who was born halachically Jewish, and my father was not born Jewish. Besides, you could consider him as a patrilineal Jew. I became very involved in the congregational life. At a certain point, our cantor, who was a freelance cantor, decided to celebrate the high holidays with us, which was, we were thrilled. And it was quite something because she gave up on a lot of money, which she could make if she would lead high holidays as she used to do. And she asked who would like to support us, not support us, who would like to join and participate in the service. And I said, yeah, well, I would. And at a certain point, she asked me, would you do the Haftarah? I said, of course. Just as an explanation, we don't do the Haftarah in Hebrew, we do the Haftarah in mother tongue. And then she came back and said, I just realized if you do Haftarah, you have to be maftir. I said, okay, what does it take to be maftir? You have to do the maftir portion in both services, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And she said, would you line the maftir? I said, if you teach me. That was my first contact with lining. I don't still in mind. ובחודש השביעי ואחת לחודש מקרא קודש יהיה לכם כל מלאכת עבודה לא תעשו יום תרועה יהיה לכם. Okay, I won't bore you with all, but this is my task up until today in the congregation. And then I said I really want to learn how to line properly. And it was COVID times. And she made me aware of Chazan Diana Brewer in New York, who gave online classes on lining. So I participated in some of these courses. I did some learning with others. And at a certain point, I felt the need, this has to come to some points, has to consolidate somehow, has to come to a certain target. When I initially spoke to my Chazan, at a point she asked me, how do you see yourself? Do you see yourself as a Ger Toshav, a stranger, just in the gates of the city, or do you see yourself as a Baal B'Tshuva? And when she suggested that, my initial reaction was, no, never, ever, ever, because all the Baalei B'Tshuva I'd met were wearing black suits. They had the tzitziot. They were wearing beards. A very good friend, very dear friend of my cousin in Israel, their son became a Baal B'Tshuva, and it's a very sad story. He almost never returns home. And if he does, all what he accepts is an apple or a bottle of water, which is still sealed. And this was exactly what I never wanted to be. But thinking about that later, today, in a manner of speaking, not in that type, in a manner of speaking, I consider myself a Baal B'Tshuva because I returned to my roots, to my Jewish roots. You could also even say it's a Mechayei Ametim. The Jewishness in our branch died with my great-grandfather. And in a way, it was not me, it was through me or Hashem by me reviving that Jewish tradition. So that's who I am, what I am here. And I thank you for your patience and for your interest. And I'm obviously open to any questions.
Do you have children?
Yes. a son. He is 37. He lived all the life with the nuisances of being a pastor's son. And when he turned 14, when he had his confirmation, he said he had enough of church for a lifetime, which is also happening at this age quite frequently. However, he was with us in Israel. He went to school in Israel. He celebrated Jewish festivals in Israel in his school. When we are at home, we do Kabbalat Shabbat, we do the Kiddush. And when his grandmother passed away, he insisted to say Kaddish at the funeral. So in a way, no, he's not religious, but in a way, I think he's very open. I consider him a deeply spiritual personality, although I can't really put my finger on it.
Were you born in Turkey also?
No. Both my brothers were born in Turkey in 1945 and 1949. Then my father joined the Foreign Service in 1952. My mother became pregnant with me in 1954. She was 35 by then, which was then considered a late pregnancy. People smile now because we know of many young women who have their first pregnancy at the age of 40. But I think, well, it's some of the things I just discussed with Mishka. We forgot to ask important questions. And now I have the questions, unfortunately, nobody to ask anymore. But I think she had given birth to two of her sons in Turkey, and I think she chose the security of feeling at home, and she traveled to Kiel in the north of Germany to her parents to give birth there. So I was born in Germany, but I stayed there for about 4 weeks. And then my parents took me on a freight ship from Bremerhaven at the mouth of the river Weser, all the way through the North Sea, the Channel, the Biscaya, around the Iberian Peninsula, Strait of Gibraltar, all the way through the Mediterranean to Lebanon. It took years later, when I had a son at this age, to appreciate how courageous that was. Parents going on a freight ship, which sometimes would not be in any port for 4 or 5 consecutive days, with a 4-week-old baby. We traveled a lot with our child, but we always knew that the next pediatrician was not further away than, let's say, half an hour's drive, if need be. I would have loved to tell her that, but she didn't live to see that. She sadly passed away exactly the day when my wife, not when my wife learned that she was pregnant. She was pregnant when those first critical 3 months were over, and we had decided now to tell our parents. Yes.
You spent your career as a Protestant minister. Now that you're a Jew, how do you think about those years and the ripple effects and the influence that you had on so many parishioners and people that you offered care to and that you were their pastor? And have you had any interactions with some of those people who now know that you have returned to your Judaism?
Well, some of my close friends and also former parishioners know of my way. Some who hadn't known reacted and said, I'm not at all surprised by my step. So I hope I had some impression effect on parishioners, but the love of the Hebrew Bible was already implanted very early in my teaching and in my preaching. And countering all those stupid Christian anti-Semitic sentiments was also a task of mine much earlier than my actual turning to Judaism. So looking back, I would say I've nothing that I should feel ashamed of. If that was something you might be referring to. And I was involved in Christian-Jewish dialogue pretty soon. But then I think it was a very important point. With the ordination, you promise to do certain services and to serve your congregation. And when I retired, there's a formal service of relieving me of these bonds, of these promises. And my actual or factual turning to Judaism took place in the last years. And just to complete the story, my cantor had suggested that in liberal Judaism, there is the process of affirmation of Judaism instead of conversion. And I had a long talk. I'm friends with the chairperson of the liberal Beit Din, or now liberal reform go together in the UK with the Beit Din, and I applied for affirmation in Judaism, and he was in favor of that solution. However, his fellow judge said they had her doubts, especially since affirmation usually requires that you should be raised at least somehow in the Jewish tradition. And being a practicing Protestant minister, I couldn't really seriously claim that. And so she advised against applying for affirmation and suggested to apply for conversion instead. But so on June 11 last year, I was at the Liberal Beit Din in London. We had a very good and intensive talk. I never had anything like formal conversion education. With all, I think I could teach converts to prepare for conversion. I didn't really need that. I had to write 2 essays. One is what being Jewish means to me, and the other one was the topic of my choice. And we had a very good conversation. And my cousin, my maternal cousin, is a liberal rabbi, now retired liberal rabbi in London, and he was also instrumental in my way, and he was my sponsoring rabbi for the process. And after a weekend, I was in the mikveh, which for me and for my congregation finalized the process. The liberals didn't really care if I had a mikveh. I have good friends, also liberal convert, who never was to a mikveh, and he didn't even understand the significance. For me, it was a very important moment. And if somebody asked me, what has changed for you? I would claim everything and nothing. Nothing, because I continued to be the same Andreas Laqueur as I'd been the day before my mikveh. I didn't change my life, but everything is, I've seen my certificate on conversion as a welcome home certificate, an official acknowledgement that I am what I am. Does it make sense to you? And so in this manner, it's very important to me. Yeah, I was on quite a nostalgic trip in New York just a few days ago. I stayed with a cousin in Fairlawn, and I spent 3 days in New York. And I was at the Jewish Museum. And it was some years ago, I think about 2015, that we, as Protestant ministers, visited Jewish congregations for Pesach. And as you know, Pesach, in most of the years, Pesach more or less coincides with Easter. And so we couldn't do any study tour with Protestant ministers because their congregations would not have understood if the minister said, well, celebrate Easter however you like, but I'm off for a study tour. But there are the occasional years, especially if there was a lap year in Judaism, where Pesach and so Easter and Pesach fall apart significantly by almost 4 weeks. And we made use of such a year. And we were in New York. We visited the Jewish Museum, not with a guided tour, but everybody on his own. And there were two young Chabadnikim. Obviously, the black suits, hats, you know how they look like. And they said, are you Jewish? And I answered as I felt, although I knew it was not exactly true. I said, yes. And then they asked me, have you prayed today? And I could be very honest and say, no. And it says, do you want to lay tefillin? This is the first time I laid tefillin, or to be more precise, I had tefillin laid for me because I wouldn't have known how. I still struggle with it because it's not my practice. And then he said, okay, speak after me. And he said, Baruch. And I said, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu. And he was very relieved to learn that he didn't have to say all the blessings word by word. I knew all the blessings, besides the one I bind myself to you, O Lord. I wouldn't have known that. But besides that, I knew all the blessings. I didn't know in which sequence to say. But this, for me, was a very important moment in my journey. And so I have my questions about what Chabadnikim do, but I wouldn't have a bad word for them because I owe them. Yeah.
Have you seen the film The Lost Transport? Came out 3 years ago, and it is about the lost train that you described with your cousin. Was it Renata?
Yeah, right. Exactly, yeah.
Renata. It seems there's a character there that might have been modeled on her.
Yes.
Okay.
We are quite sure it was modeled on her. Okay. The author, of course, claims it's strictly fictional. What else could it be? Even the partner of that was modeled after her then husband, Paul Goldschmidt. I saw the film and I was furious. Remember the scene when this cattle wagon opens? The main character steps out with a little bit dirt on the cheek, a little bit dirt there. They'd been for 17 days in that cattle wagon, for heaven's sake. People have died there. They would have never looked anything close to that. And then this romantic story, you know, of course, women are the better people, no doubt about that. I would never argue that as a man, I wouldn't dare to. The Soviet sharpshooter woman and the former BDM blonde Nazi girl, and the main character forming a new friendship. Lovely romantic story, but it doesn't have to do anything with what Renata describes in her diaries. That's what made me furious. You can think up any story. You're an author, you're free to do so. But don't call it The Lost Train, really evoking a very specific historic event. I attended a meeting of survivors and the descendants of Bergen-Belsen last summer. And I met people who still were with Renata on the Lost Train as very little children. I was deeply impressed. But that's a different story. And so if they had called it in any other way, if they didn't evoke the memory of Tröwitz, the actual place where this actual train was finally liberated by the Red Army. I wouldn't care. But in a way, this is deceiving the audience in that specific aspect.
And you were searching for Teresa's.
Therese, yes, sorry, exactly. That was the name I was missing.
I know we're going to end in a minute, but I just have a question for you. What of your wife, who lived a life with you as, as the wife of a Protestant minister, ministered together with you at this program in Israel?
Mm-hmm.
How is she feeling about your return to Judaism?
I don't want to sound flippant, but she saw that coming for a long time. No, she is very supportive. We have wonderful discussions. When she prepares sermons, she still, although she's retired, she actively preaches in congregations. We have wonderful theological discussions. She has adapted the habit. She lights Shabbat candles if I'm there or if I'm not there. We have the practice of reading at least parts of the Parashat HaShavua in Hebrew together, and then discuss it with the help of Sfaria. It's pure joy. If you're here on Shabbat, you might see she gave me a talit. Oh, let's put it out. We had a collection of Judaica items we used for educational purposes. We were invited to school classes to give some basic understanding of Jewish practice, and the talit was among them. I started using that, but excuse me, I started struggling to use that because it was always slipping off my shoulders. And I can't concentrate on prayer when I still always try to regain my talit. And then our chairperson said, why don't you use half a talit? Because you don't have to wear the full size. You can have half the size. And so my wife, who's very practical, took a pair of scissors and simply cut the talit in 2 pieces. When we were in Israel again, I bought another set of tzitziot, and then she applied new corner markings, and we attached this new tzitziot to the old talit, and the atara was left over. And then I was away, and when I came back, it was my birthday, and she gave me the other half of the talit, and she hand embroidered in cross stitch the atara on my talit. This makes it my very personal talit. Is that an answer to your question?
Yes, thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
You're going to be with us for Shabbat?
Yes.
Yes, I was about to say, and then Amy will close us out, that Andreas will be delivering the Dvar Torah this Shabbat. So tell everybody to come and to hear a former Protestant preacher preach on the parasha of
Noah.
Parashat Noah from the perspective of a person who has returned to Judaism and will share words of Torah with us.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for announcing me in that way. I would say I will just try and undertake to give justice to the Torah.
Thank you.
And what the Torah tells us. I think it's a set of fascinating stories.
We look forward.
Thank you. There's cookies and some drinks in the library. Please come have a little snack.
Thank you very much.
What story? Sure.
So I hope